So this is a Friday morning, and I'm happy to say that the sunlight is going to come straight into my room along with Pat McGart's presence. How are you, Pat, this morning?
I'm grand, Jude. How are you? Happy New Year.
I'm fighting good. Oh, Happy New Year to you too. Although it's sort of like, what is it? This is the 5th, is it? The 5th
That's
of
it.
January. The sort of thrill
Okay.
of the thrill of the new has gone off it. We're just stuck on
Exactly.
the
And
guts of
it's much the same as the
January.
last one.
January's not a
Exactly.
good month. I always think it's very long. I used to find it very long at school. It seemed to
Yeah.
go on forever. And then when you got to February, it wasn't so bad. It was a quick month. And then the next thing you knew, St. Patrick's Day. Anyway, you're fighting fit, are you?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Well, let's do a bit of fighting then. Now, they say you should never speak ill of the dead, which would mean that you'd have to avoid speaking ill of the likes of Cromwell, for example. Uh, but Frank Kitson, was he a general? Sir
Yeah. It
Frank
was
Kitson?
General
Aye.
General Sir Frank Kitson.
Sir
Yeah.
Frank Kitson died a couple of days ago. And I think he was held up by and large in the British press as being, an eminent figure and a servant of the crown and all the rest. Here in the north of Ireland, and I suspect throughout Ireland, he is held in anything but that. I was quite surprised, although I was glad to see it happen, when the head of the SDLP was asked his opinion, and he said, that he had left nothing but sort of misery in his trail, and that he was far from respected here. Would that be your own take on
Yeah.
him?
Absolutely, Jude. I remember years ago. No, I don't think I read the whole book, but I certainly read most of it. He wrote this book called Low Intensity Operations,
Mm.
whereby basically, Jude, Kitson subverted the legal and political system totally. He uh, he learned from a lot of these operations against the Mau Mau in Kenya and places like that, or wherever, Aden and so on. And in other words, they forgot about the law totally. While this sort of paradigm that we have all been uh, suckered into believing that the Irish were the rebels, the Nationals were the rebels, the
Mm.
Protestants were the bigots, and the British Army were the good guys in the middle, the honest brokers trying to keep these mad Irish people from destroying each other. Jude, as we all know, and increasingly know, the British Army were far from impartial. They were far from, they were active players in the whole thing. And that's that. All right, leaving that aside, uh, Kitson, he came up with the whole idea of infiltrating groups. He came up with the idea of psych operations. He smeared people. He believed also during this thing, basically about a couple of really horrific murders and scare the shit out of people. Like, he was up to his eyeballs in Ballymurphy. He was up to his eyeballs in Bloody Sunday. He was up to his eyeballs in McGurk's Bar. So this is the sort of guy we're talking about. And there were all sorts of what's the military reaction force, which were basically a killing squad. He was up to their eyeballs. And he deliberately used all sorts of underhand tactics while claiming we were fighting terrorism. If you only split it down, he was every bit as bad as every of the terrorists he claimed he was fighting.
Uh-huh. Well, now, would you not respond to? Do you think he saw himself in that light? Do you think he
Well,
saw
I mean,
himself as a bad man?
I'm not putting words in her mouth, but a person, Ruth Dudley Edwards and Owen Harris and all these right wing commentators will regard him as a man who took the fight to the IRA, all that sort of stuff. It's absolute bollocks because, well, for so long, there's this sort of thing. Dude, the IRA, I keep saying this. I've never supported the IRA, but I can understand totally. When you had 50 years of unionist muscle, you can see it what's happening in Gaza now as well.
Hmm.
When you have suppression, subjugation, discrimination, bigotry, there's going to be a valve let loose somewhere. And the IRA with a valve, whether you agree with them or disagree. And instead of sort of addressing the big concerns, people like Kitson sort of thought we can bring these boys to heel like the old British Empire, and we'll treat them like the Mama, and like they did in India, Amritsar, and everywhere else.
But his job, Pat, his job as a British officer leader was to win. All's fair in love and war. if you're working with the security services and MI5 and so on, or what was it, MR, the Military Reaction
What is
Force, MRF.
Military Reaction Force, MRF?
Now, yeah, do you
Yeah,
mean? I mean, the name of the game is to smear people, to confuse the enemy, and to do everything you can to bring them down. Uh, is that
yeah.
not fair enough? Like, I know we don't like him. I certainly don't like him, and you don't like him. But from his point of view, from the British point of view, they want to get in there and defeat
Oh,
this
yeah,
surge.
okay. Let's even take your argument. But the hypocrisy to suggest that they went up their eyeballs in dirty tricks, to suggest that they played fair, to suggest which they have done, by the way. And have you read this? Have you read the Sunday Independent for about 20 years when Owen Harris and J.P. Murphy, or A.J.P. Murphy, what they call the guy, professor of history in Cork, Ruth
Aye.
Dudley Edwards, and all the one columnist after another, you would be firmly of to believe that the IRA came out of nowhere, that there was no reason for violence, there was no reason for anything, that the Brits were the good guys, and if only everybody would follow the same pattern as the Brits, the troubles would be over and everything would be resolved. That is the biggest load of bollocks, dude, you could possibly
Yeah,
come across.
I agree with you, Pat. But I'm saying that it's a logical thing for him to do. As a
Yeah,
British
I'm not
officer.
disputing that, dude. Yeah,
Well, you see, that's the thing you need to keep in mind, I think. It's
yeah,
not that he's acted out of character. His role was to do all those things, and he did
yeah,
it pretty successfully. You'd still have, certainly, I'd
absolutely.
say the vast majority of unionists would see
Yeah, but no,
the,
no. The point I'm trying to make, Jude, is the hypocrisy of it. This guy will be feted, and General Sir Frank Kitson, he'll be part of the establishment. He will be honoured, and his memory will be, sacred to the British Army for years to come. Oh, he was a great man, and all the rest of it. But when you're wearing a uniform and you're part of the establishment, when you do what he does, it's perfectly acceptable. When you're Martin McGuinness and you live on the Bogside in Derry and you do what he does, you're a terrorist.
well, you see, that's part of his job was not only to engage in, I suppose, killing people and innocent people on occasion, but also to spread a vision of the opposition, which everybody will reject.
Yeah,
Like you mentioned the Mau Mau, and I think he was involved
yeah,
with that. When I
yeah, he
was
was.
growing up, we were taken as a school, primary school, to the pictures for a documentary about the Queen's visit to Kenya. And the Mau
Yeah,
Mau were presented as a bunch of savages who,
absolutely.
forced people to join this terrible, disgusting outfit that went and killed white people. That was the
Yeah,
vision, and we sort of accepted it. That's how wars, that's how conflicts really operate.
yeah. I remember this army guy. He was a nice fella, actually. I was invited when I was editor of the journal. I used to go over. They would come over now and again to my office, and I would go over again to theirs. It
Mm.
was part of the whole game we all played. And I remember going over to this guy, and he was the colonel over in Belfast, from in the Derry area, whatever NX or something they called it. Anyway, so I went over to see him in his office, and he said, "Yeah, Pat, the old trick. We used to go into the village and shoot the chief. That cowed the rest of them." And I thought that's what they tried to do here with Bloody Sunday and Ballymurphy. And by the way, he said that openly.
Mm.
That was the old British. So in Kenya and places like that, their undercover soldiers go to night and kill the chief. I know that would frighten the rest of them. So that was terror tactics. So
Mm.
this sort of thing that we were civilized and there's what really annoys me, Jude, I suppose what I'm getting at is so many people still buy that. What narrative, I suppose, is the word that the Brits, came here and they were the good guys. Jude, and the convention, as you well know, and Westminster was for 50 years. Unionists were at Stormont were allowed to do what they were, and there was a convention at Westminster. No, British never mentioned this. When the nationalist community rose up against it, far from getting the support of the Brits, there was a lot of the soldiers come in and within a very short space of time, rather than sort of saying this place is a dung heap, they started acting basically like the unionists at Stormont.
Mm. Well, I suppose we have to keep in mind that he saw himself as doing the thing that was necessary. We saw him as doing the thing that was brutal and
Yeah.
lying and cruel and a whole range of things. And I know we shouldn't speak ill of the dead, but I mean those are the facts, and they're borne out, as you say, starting with Kenya, working his way through Belfast to then Derry. bad stuff. And I'm sure there's any number of operations under the surface that we
Yeah,
still quite
that we'll
don't
never
know
hear
about.
of. Yeah,
And
exactly. But
he
you,
sort of
there's
gloried
I
in
think there's
that.
a guy with the namesake of my own, a fellow called Kieran McArch. I think his grandmother was killed in possibly Ballymurphy.
I saw
He
that in
said
Twitter.
yesterday that Kitson should be tried as a war criminal. I agree totally. Should
Yeah.
if he was on it. By the way, they tried to say McGurk Spar, and I think this is all part of the. By the way, that was another arm of the whole thing of the propaganda war. They tried to say McGurk Spar was an own goal and all that. Like they knew the loyalists had planted the bomb, but just to smear everything and confuse everything, they said, "Oh no, it was an IRA." And for a long time, people believed it was IRA. In actual fact, the killing of the Catholics was done by loyalists, but the British Army under Kitson just deliberately to smear Republicans and to confuse it all again. And by the way, Jude, as you said just 2 seconds ago, there were so many other operations, nefarious ones that we will never hear about. Probably even up to shooting dead of young Catholics walking on the streets of Belfast. They could easily have been done by British Army guys as much as the loyalists. We just don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose it's you see, it's a question of singling him out. He's such an obvious target in a way to say that he was a terrible force for evil, even in the conflict. But if you think of other conflicts, like if you think of the Second World War, say, and
Yeah.
who was it that was the president at the time, given the orders to nuclear bomb Japan?
I was
My
at
God,
Eisenhower.
he would be in the Hypney, Kitson would be in the Hypney place behind him. And yet,
Yeah,
nobody
but
says Harry Truman, disgusting, vile man. He's
uh,
another president.
yeah, but he introduced this in-depth interrogation. I remember being told by one Republican, no, one of the tricks, Jude, is they used to handcuff somebody to a pipe, a radiator,
Radiator.
and turn it on for full blast. Jude, you know, uh, you were almost burned alive, but you couldn't, like, by the way, but there was no signs of any damage, It was just, that was just a subtle sort of thing. You were actually tied to a radiator, and that was turned on full blast, and maybe you had to sit there for an hour. Dude, that there stuff like that, and there was then the gangs were marauding gangs. They were involved in murder, all sorts of stuff, dude. And that'll be all swept away. I mean, when you get the Daily Telegraph on Saturday, the obituaries, it'll be just lauding him, one of the great servants of the British Empire, respected, what would you say, terrorist, what would you say, successful type,
Yeah,
and fighting terrorists. He'll be
yeah,
regarded as one of the greats.
yeah, yeah. Well, we shouldn't be too surprised. I think the thing that disappoints me is the extent to which the line he promoted, the line you've outlined, where the bad guys are the fighting Irish, who want to cut each other's throats, and here's the peacekeeper coming. The degree to which that was sold to people, and even nationalist people, where it was said, like you've described some of the things disorienting and what amounted to torture. And I remember guys talking about that, and Sinn Féin trying to say, yeah, this is going on. There was a wide swathe of the Catholic and nationalist population who would have said, load of rubbish. They're making up lies. They want us to believe that they're the good guys. But then time has proven that, in fact, everything they said was true, and that worse things were done that we. But
Yeah.
Pat, we'll come on to this other item in a minute. But why do say that the government in the south, leave aside the government in the north, why did the government in the south, why have they never weighed in and said what you have articulated about the conflict? Why have they always sort of kept it at arm's
I've
length?
often asked myself that question, and in fact, the fact that the Dublin government went so westward so early that they bought hook, line, and sinker the line that was coming out of London. It's like watching nowadays. Jude, the British government know what the Americans are supporting in Gaza, but for some reason they will continue to support it. Maybe it's because they think economically, socially, or whatever, it's too risky to go against the Americans. Well, I'm wondering that the Dublin government said that the choice is, look here, I'm sort of we don't want to fall out with the Brits. They're too powerful and we need them and all that sort of stuff. But I remember, Jude, Frank Kern, who was the editor of the Derry Journal before me, went up one time. He told me, I think he might have been with Eddie McAteer, went up to see, I think it was Sean Lamass. Now, you remember, keep in mind, Sean Lamass was a farmer Republican
Yeah.
activist and during in the 1920s. Apparently, McAteer came out and Frank said to him, "Well, how'd that go?" He says, basically, Lamass's attitude was a plague in both your houses, up north. He just didn't want anything to do with the north. And Jude, I think, remember that one of the first people was Paddy Hillary at a Fianna Fáil Ardèche when someone, Blaney and Boland and a couple of others, he says you can have someone else, but you cannot have Fianna Fáil. In other words, Fianna Fáil were making sure that they stayed out of the conflict in the north. And I think to justify that they weren't going to help their fellow nationalists, they sort of said, these are bad guys and we don't support them. I think that was the, it was the line of least resistance.
It went further than that, though, Pat. I mean, as you well remember, there was a famous. It went right into the media. The Late Late Show, Gay Byrne, the effort to do a job on Gerry Adams by lining up all these guys who were going to say the terrible things he had done and what a terrible guy he was. And that doesn't even stop with Gay Byrne, who's gone, dead and gone now. Ryan Tubridy, I remember so well interviewing Gerry Adams. It was a very rocky sort of an interview you gave him. I don't think there's a journalist in the South who wouldn't start, when they start talking about to any of these major Republicans like Gerry Adams, or if Mark McGuinness was alive or whatever, they always start with the bad things they've done. This is a bad man. How does he justify what he's doing? So that narrative, as you say, was sold not just to the politicians, but it was sold to the public. The public believed it because here were nice guys like Gay Byrne that everybody loved, and here's Ryan Tubridy, who at that time was loved, and you go along with it. And as you say, guys like John A. Murphy, Professor John A. Murphy, he's explaining, I'm a historian. I know that these are just a bunch of thugs up there, as distinct from during the 1920s, early 1920s.
Yeah, I just love these people who had credibility because they were a professor. They bugger all about it, and I mean, I could say it, and not in the least but arrogantly. I knew more about what was going on than they did because I was right in the middle of it, and I wouldn't claim to know everything that's going on. But the guy sitting down the safety of his house down about Cork, who'd never visited the North other than come up to give a lecture at Queen's University.
He did come up. He did come up not to give lectures.
I know, Jude, but what do you call it? They come up to give a lecture.
Let me tell you a wee story.
Then went back down again. And when I hear Ruth Dudley Edwards doing the same, Jude, that sort of stuff. Like, I was dealing with them day and daily, and I'm not claiming to be an expert now, but what limited knowledge I would have would be far in excess of those people. So, like, I find it a wee bit hard to take what they're saying. But Jude, you sort of go on, and you look at some of the stuff that's been said and done, Jude, and you go, it's a load of rubbish, and we were basically all conned.
I think some of these people conned themselves even, because Johnny Murphy was an external examiner on a course that I was involved with at the Ulster University. And I remember him up, and there was an evening they had a meal. They had a department give a meal, and I was invited to it, and they were talking. And things swung inevitably around to politics. And I suggested, this was, I can't remember when, it must have been well into the 80s. I suggested that, Sinn Féin was on the rise, and there might well come a day when they would surpass the SDLP. Well, John A. Murphy said, "What? Are you saying to me that my friends, people who are doctors and accountants and dentists and respectable people in society, that they'll start voting for Sinn Féin?" Not at all, and no time at all. The conversation was so soured that there was nearly coming to blows. But I think he believed his own propaganda. I think when you spout a line for a while, you begin to believe in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was so much that's but anyway, we're sort of beating dead horse.
I probably kicked it off
because I think, Jude. I think a lot of what was said years ago has been totally discredited. And Jude, when I keep referring back to that book, Lethal Allies, Anne Cadwallader's book,
Yeah.
A couple of people that you and I both know who worked in the diplomatic service would tell you that there was a lot of stuff flowing back to Dublin. They knew a lot more than was ever publicised,
Yeah.
but I think they made a political decision that it doesn't suit Dublin's interest to get involved on the side of nationalism. So, for a long time, there were political decisions made that it suits us not to do anything and to sort of follow the Brit line. And the paradigm, Jude, was very simple. The IRA are the bad guys, and you don't open a war on two fronts. So let's keep going at that one, and so on.
Well, I just leave it at this. The thing that amazes me is that, like, you take Derry, right? Derry was marked by Bloody Sunday. The city will always have a scar, that terrible thing, and nobody will ever forget that. And it's acknowledged it was an appalling thing. Now, the Dublin Monaghan bombings, I think everybody in Ireland must have a fair idea that the British Army was involved in that, or British intelligence, as well as loyalists. And yet, nobody has made an effort to find out what was going on. And we have Drew Harris, who was involved with the intelligence services in the north. You assume that. We don't know, but you'd assume that he would know quite a bit about it if he was dealing with them. But anyway.
Even if he wasn't active at the time, I presume his access to files,
Aye. But the point is that there's no impetus from the Irish government. The Dublin government doesn't say. When have you heard Leo Varadkar standing up and saying, this Dublin Monaghan bombing thing, we really should get to the root of it? Because that was the biggest slaughter of people in the entire Troubles.
No, that's a sort of Pandora's box that they don't want to open, Jude, because there's so many things. They just want to put it behind them and so on. Like, that's not very nice for the relatives of those who died.
I can't understand it. I can't understand how the relatives aren't so angry that they really want to, would insist on it. And I'm surprised that the public aren't so angry. I mean, what?
Yeah.
Why are we lambs to the
slaughter? There were so many deaths. What was it? 3,000 deaths.
Yeah.
I got to admit, I have to own up this, and it's see in the north, you know us, Jesus, who am I telling? Eventually, one death sort of melds into another, and eventually, when somebody says, "Did you remember that killing?" You're going, "No, who's that?" Whereas in a normal society, you would have said, "Oh, geez, I would stand out." Somebody says, "Did you hear about that?" I have to go, "No, fill me in the details of that one."
Yeah, that's true. But we're talking about big events, though, Pat. We're talking about Bloody Sunday. We're talking about Ballymurphy, and we're talking about Dublin Monaghan. You huge numbers of people who lost their lives at the same time. So how odd it is that Bloody Sunday, everybody acknowledges, was a terrible thing. Ballymurphy was a terrible thing, finally was forced into the public view. We know Dublin and Monaghan were terrible, but everybody just sort of, it seems to me, everybody in the south and everybody in the north just says, yeah, it happened. That was it.
It happened. I agree with you totally.
It's depressing. Okay, let's press on to this question you've raised, Pat. And I mentioned it the last day, I think, but you've pinned it down a wee bit more. And that's the question of boycotting goods that have Israeli connections. Tell us about that. There's a well-known firm of...
No, I was reading yesterday, Jude, apparently, particularly in the Middle East and certain other countries, McDonald's are getting hit big time by a boycott because McDonald's in Israel is giving out free food to the IDF. This was noted by several journalists and so on, and pointed out that the McDonald's are supplying free food to all IDF soldiers. So a boycott has started now in the Middle East and various other countries. They're sympathetic. Now, you'd even heard about a month ago, it is about a month ago, that there was some McDonald's outlet somewhere in County Mayo, and somebody went past, thanks be to God, not a single person in McDonald's tonight. Some wee Ballinmullet or somewhere. I'm not certain where it was, so my apologies, I've got the wrong time. But anyway, bottom line is, second, what do you call the coffee shop? Starbucks. Apparently, they 12 billion has been knocked off their value as well, because they're closely the CEO of I'm open to correction this, but I think it's the CEO has made a number of personal donations to the IDF. So they're getting hit big time. So Jude, in America, there are certain cities and states where it's illegal for any public body to boycott Israeli companies. But Jude, me and you can boycott them, and I most certainly will be boycotting
Uh,
Starbucks and McDonald's.
well,
I will certainly be boycotting them
yeah.
because anyone that's supporting what the hell's going on in Gaza right now, in my humble opinion, now maybe let's McDonald's or Starbucks come back and say, look, we're not doing this, or we're fair enough. If they're not, I'll apologize unreservedly. But
Uh,
right now, I don't care whether it's McDonald's, Starbucks, Ford Motor Company, Jude Collins, Pat McGart, whoever it is. If you're supporting what Israel's doing now, you're not going to get my support.
aye, that's right. But the thing is, see, I tend to be I'm too critical, I suppose, and I think it's good to hear that people are boycotting, and you would hope that an economic impact would change things. It certainly changed things, helped change things in South Africa, because people
Yeah,
started boycotting and weren't going to games and they're demonstrating at rugby games and so on. But you say that people are stopping buying this product, McDonald's.
yeah,
Who's organizing it? What is the government? Is there a government? And if you take it here, the South or the North or America, is there a government figure who's saying what's happening there is wrong? I'm urging everybody to sign up to this document which says I will not have any product by McDonald's and not have any product by whoever in my house, or I personally will never consume it. Why is it always left to individuals and sort of ad hoc?
yeah,
That's not
yeah.
as effective as it should be at all.
But by the way, Jude, as well, no, what used to be I thought was the middle of the road is now considered far left. Like, to be seen to be calling now for a ceasefire in Gaza
Yeah.
means you're a leftist.
Uh,
You know, it's unbelievable. And if you're calling for a boycott of McDonald's or Starbucks, or you're an extreme leftist,
you think so,
I
Pat? I
used to
wonder if
think
that's
that was,
true. Is that?
to stop killing people. I used to think that was just common sense,
Aye.
common decency,
Well, of
middle of
course.
the road human being. But when you look at it now, Jude, not a single senior American politician has called for a ceasefire. Not one.
Aye, but that's the
Right,
politicians,
Britain.
Pat.
Name me one British senior politician has called for a ceasefire. And you go and you sort of go, wait a minute, Jude, as the corporate or corporation world, bought these people totally,
Oh
or
yeah.
are marriage values so skewed now that it's all right to kill an entire nation of people?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you see, you're talking about politicians. Uh I think the politicians are too weak. They're too subject to the pressures that the big companies, Murdoch and the rest of these people, can put on them when they
Yeah.
want to. Uh, but I don't know who's going to lead it then, because I don't honestly believe that if it's just people like yourself or myself or people we know who boycott these goods, that's not going to have a big enough impact. You really need to have it
So sure, Jude. You
organized on a
see, at one
statewide
stage, Jude,
basis.
yeah, but Jude, at one stage, the mainstream media could control nearly everything. Jude, people like me and you might be small beer, but hey, if there's enough of us, what is it? So let's not do a boycott. Said 6 billion people. Like if we all,
Yeah.
if we all said,
Uh,
hey, irrespective of what the politicians do, we can all
mm.
make an individual choice.
Well, that's a good point. There's a whole range of, it isn't just Starbucks, it isn't just McDonald's. There's a whole
Well, I'm
range
not singling them out, but
unlikely.
they're the ones
I
in the
looked
news.
online now, and I'm not sure how reliable these facts are, but they listed a number of companies. Among
Yeah,
them was one of the computer companies, was it Hewlett Packard or something? I'm not
I think
sure.
it was Intel.
Intel maybe. They listed Airbnb.
Yeah,
Uh, companies that you would never associate with anything political, and yet they're
yeah,
behind the scenes, essentially funding Israel. And Israel, of course, depends hugely on the funding coming from other states and from other, I suppose, outside sources. That's the only thing we can do. It's the Israeli state and its military forces are so shameless and the way they've gone about trying to obliterate the Palestinian people. I think that has sickened an awful lot of people. Awful lot of
yeah.
people. Not
But
politicians.
Jude,
Maybe it's
as
sickened
well as that,
politicians, but they
yeah,
can live
but
with
they've
it,
got this thing as well, Jude. They've got this professional thing of I think it's called Aspara, where they've got all these people, propaganda people, and no matter the what do you call it, the president of Harvard lost her job there quite recently
Yeah.
because she spoke out. Now, there's some people trying to say now it was because there's some bits of plagiarism in her doctorate or something. But
Yes.
you know,
So what did she do, Pat? What did she do? I wasn't quite
I'm not
clear.
100% certain, Jude, but she spoke out about the war in Gaza, and immediately I think people started trolling through
Jeez.
various emails about her past academic career and set until they got her. And by the way, Jude has got a serious thing about free speech in America, and it's becoming more and more. America is definitely becoming more fascist. Like Donald Trump is actually on record as saying if he gets back in again, he's going to do an Erdogan. Anybody that opposed him, he's going to root out the Justice Department. He's going to do out the Department of Foreign Affairs or whatever,
Yeah.
Homeland Security or whatever else,
Yeah.
and the deep state. And Jude, in America now, I think it's the United States of Israel, not the United States of America.
But the sad part is, Pat, you're worrying about Trump. Joe Biden has said he's got Israel's back. And any number of people I've spoken to have felt so disillusioned by that. The Joe Biden they
Yeah,
saw in Ireland is so different from the Joe Biden who's now speaking and defending.
yeah.
Essentially, he's defending the bloody slaughter of these people.
I think he
And
got 4.2 million from the APEC last year. I think
yeah,
he's the biggest donor. Jude, that's no matter what way you put it, Jude. When you get 4.2 million, like somebody can check it out, or 2.4 million, not
yeah,
100%. He's got, I think it was the biggest donation of any politician in America.
uh,
When
uh,
you're bought and paid for, and you are bought and paid for, if you're
uh,
accepting money to that level,
see,
because Jude, you're not going to bite the hand that feeds you.
you nearly despair when things get to that stage. I mean, just to make a historical parallel very quickly, all of us, certainly, I was very glad to see the back of Thatcher. And John Major was in, and I was glad to see the back of him too, although I wouldn't have hard feelings against him that I would have against Thatcher. But entered Tony Blair, did good things in the Irish scene, but then he went and invaded Afghanistan and was responsible for the deaths of
Yeah,
thousands.
but
So
Jude,
even the good guys in politics are the bad.
aye, but Jude, there was another thing. He hadn't the moral courage to tell the Americans to go take a run. The
Yeah,
Americans wanted in there for their own reasons, and they needed cover, diplomatic cover across the globe, and
yeah,
their special relationship. And a million people, Jude,
yeah,
went marching through London before that war to tell
yeah.
Tony Blair, and yet Tony was so arrogant that I'm right and you're wrong, and so on. And Jude, see, I can't even remember the name. Remember this? Was it the Swedish guy? The expert on the weapons who had gone into Iraq and said, I can find nothing. Like, why didn't they give him a time? Like, those guys were going places and they said they could find nothing
Uh,
to indicate. And you need massive infrastructure for this sort of stuff.
uh, terrible. Okay. We've only a few minutes left, Pat. I really like to hear what your views are on this because I think I'm not sure we'll agree on it. Enoch Burke. Does that name
Ah,
reverberate when I
yes,
say it?
yes,
Let me very briefly
yeah,
try to sketch what he is for people. Enoch Burke is a fundamentalist Christian living in, I'm not
yeah.
sure where it is, somewhere around Dublin, is it?
Down about Wicklow, I think.
Wicklow, yeah, Wicklow. And he was a teacher in a school, and there was a
Yeah,
trans student there, and the trans student wanted to be described by certain pronouns, like, I don't know, him or her, or they, or whatever. And
yeah.
this guy, Enoch Burke, refused to do that. And eventually he was, I think, dismissed by the school
Mm.
as a teacher. And he kept turning up at the gates of the school and inside the gates of the school, and he was taken to court, and he is
Mm.
presently in prison, and he has spent over 200 days in prison. Now, what do you think? Would you say, here's a man that is deserving of his fate, he wouldn't do what the court told him? Or would you say, here's a guy who knows what he believes is right and wrong, and he's sticking to it?
Yeah, I agree with the latter. No, but having said that, I don't. There's certain part of what he's at I don't agree with.
Hmm.
Jude, he is going back into school, and he is going interrupting classes and all the rest of it. The
Well, I'm
school
not
said to
sure
go on
that's
him.
true, Pat. Sorry, that second part, I'm not sure
No, it
that's
is
true.
true, Jude. Jude, he was down, and apparently he's standing outside the school, and then
That's right,
he
yes.
was found. He was found on, I think, on the open to correction, but I think he was found on the premises on one occasion.
Yes. Oh, yes. It's true.
And
But I'm
the
not sure he
principal
went
said
into
it was.
classrooms.
But remember, the principal said it wasn't so much that he hasn't a right to, but she says he hasn't a right to interrupt the whole school to impose his views on everybody else.
So what would you say then, that if he's in prison for 200 days or whatever, that he's brought
He
it
shouldn't be in
on
prison for
himself?
200 days, Jude. No, definitely not. There has to be another way of doing this. Sort of, he has to purge his contempt. In other words, he has to say he's wrong. I don't believe he's wrong. He's quite entitled to his views.
You think he's a man wronged?
Aye, absolutely.
I tend to think the same. I'll tell you why. He's so much against the current of opinion that it's hard
Yeah.
not to admire him. Secondly, he's a guy who just doesn't have an opinion. He acts on it and he takes the consequences. Thirdly, they're a very interesting family. They're very bright, apparently. We're all homeschooled.
No, Jude, I don't agree with all of their stuff. I think,
No,
personally, I don't agree with this sort of ramming views down everybody's throat. But he's a man of principle and he's entitled to his views.
Aye. Oh, well, that's true. Well, as a pity, we're running out of time now, but I find that a very interesting story. And I'd be very interested. I just think the media are very harsh on him, and if he'd taken another line and been principled, they would have been happy with
the old liberal line had been so much
exactly,
nicer.
Exactly. Pat, lovely talking to you
Good luck,
again.
Jude.
You're looking well.
Jude.
You're looking every
I'm
time
younger
I meet
looking,
you.
I'm getting every day. Thanks very much, Jude.
Okay, Pat.
See you later, Jude.
Okay.
Bye. Good luck.